Welcome to Chapter 6, Part 2 of the Jatco CVT jf010e transmission. In this chapter you will learn to rebuild the sub-assemblies for this unit. My name is Jared Warren, and I'll be your host for this course. It's a great day to fix transmissions, so let's get started. Alrighty, so first we're going to dive into the pump on this. The main thing that we see on this unit is this flow control valve right here. As you see in this picture, the worn areas of the flow control valve, usually it is just staring you right straight in the face. You pull this valve out and you'll see the nice shiny marks on the valve itself. So make sure you remove this 10mm Allen. You have this spring and spacer in there, and the flow control valve itself. A couple different ways of fixing this valve. Sonics makes a ream and a tool that you can go ahead and ream this out and make an oversized flow control valve. Also, Transco makes a drop-in valve, which is like a steel sleeve valve inside of it. Either or works really well. On the pump side of it, check your bushing on your new converter that you're getting. Make sure the bushing's nice and snug, not too loose. Bushings, before you knock this bushing out, make sure you can get a replacement. The bushing is staked into place. I haven't seen too many bushing wear issues on this pump, but you definitely want to check it. When you put a new front seal in it, go ahead and just press the seal in. Make sure it's flush with the top there. You do not want to press it in too far, or the seal will contact the bushing and it will blow the front seal out. If you're into vacuum checking another way, you can vacuum check this port right here in this pump. Usually this valve's so bad you don't even have to vacuum check it. You just pull it apart and you see that it's worn. Very low mileage, this issue. Pump pocket, pump gears, ID marks face you. There's a couple bushings that you want to check on the inside of this pump gear. There's actually a bushing that rides on the stator. Make sure that bushing's in good shape, and this front stator bushing. So check your gear pocket under the gears. Make sure there's no scoring, wear, or anything along those lines. Again, check the stator bushing. The seal steel stator where the pump gear bushing rides, make sure it's nice and clean and smooth. On the back section, make sure where the seal surfaces ride inside the stator are nice and smooth, no ridges or anything like that. Change your rings on the stator. And then one other note on these pump bolts, you take a 6mm Allen bolts. They're roughly 31mm long, and we want to torque them to 20 foot-pounds of torque. These bolts are very soft, so I recommend like using a impact driver, possibly a little heat to get the thread locker to break free. But these bolts can strip out very, very easily, that's for sure. So take some care when you're tearing it apart, when you're putting it back together. Loctite it and torque them to 20 foot-pounds. The input shaft that goes into the forward clutch, make sure you check your ring lands and change the 4 Teflon rings. You got one small ring that goes here on the end, and then these 3 are the same size. The input shaft, you can put it into the forward drum, and there's a snap ring that holds it into place here. This snap ring's 48 thousandths thick. To remove the ring gear, you have 2 snap rings. This top one here is 67 thousandths. The bottom one's also 67 thousandths. And remove your ring gear. Then for the clutch pack itself, you have another snap ring here that holds the pressure plate in. It's 85 thousandths thick. You have a pressure plate, 4 clutches, and 4 steels. And then you have a apply plate or shim. On this model is 43 thousandths. I'm sure they're different on some other models. So if you need to adjust the thickness or adjust the clearance, The thickness of this shim is probably going to change for you. You probably have to find a good used drum, hard parts, something like that, not available from the dealer. The blue lines here indicate the cushion plate. The smallest portion, so the inside portion here, is up, and the larger outside portion is down and rides against the piston. Go ahead and put this thing in a arbor press or foot press, something to compress the spring down. The bonded piston retainer or the spring retainer is 38 thousandths snap ring. Then you have your bonded balance piston, a return spring cage, your forward piston, and your forward drum. Forward drum, you want to check your spline. Make sure the splines are good. Make sure the area where the steels ride in the clutch drum is good. And then also on the other side, you'll want to make sure that the bore where the sealing rings ride is also good. Go ahead and clean everything up, and then we'll go ahead and stack this back up. So over here we're on your forward piston. Check for cracks. Make sure everything's clean. Place the D-shaped seals on it. Go ahead and lube them up and install them into the drum. Put your spring cage on. And then we used Hyper Blue pistons from Seal Aftermarket. The pistons will, they have these little divots in their style of pistons, so you can actually spin this piston until it clicks into the spring cage. Go ahead and press this all back together and put your 38 thousandth snap ring in on top. So now we need to stack the forward clutch up. There's some ID marks here on the dish plate, as we talked about on the last slide. The outside largest part of this dish goes against the piston. The smallest part goes against the shim. Install the shim. This one was 43 thousandths. It has no external teeth. Put that against your dish plate. Then you'll want to install a steel first, a 52 thousandths steel. And the clutches are 58 thousandths. Alternate them all the way up until you get 4 clutches, 4 steels. Pressure plate, this one is 139 thousandths. And then finish off with the 85 thousandths snap ring. One thing I've found with CVT is that the fluid's not contaminated. Most of the clutches are reusable and are in good shape. You can elect to swap them out or install new ones if you like, or you can go ahead and reuse the originals. Go ahead and measure your forward clutch clearance. You should have around 40-ish thousandths or so between the snap ring and the pressure plate. So you can either stick a feeler gauge in here and measure in between the snap ring and the pressure plate, dial indicator, and then stroke the piston with like a scribe, something like that, to see what the clearance is. This one here had 48 thousandths. This clutch only comes on when you put it into drive, so the clearance isn't real critical, but you want to be in the 40 thousandths, 40 to 60 thousandths range. Go ahead and install your lower snap ring, 67 thousandths snap ring, your ring gear. The ring gear itself, it does not matter which way it goes in. There is no difference on which way. I personally like to mark the ring gear or keep it going in the same direction so you don't change the planet pattern. And then go ahead and put the top 67 thousandths snap ring in, and we're done with your forward drum. Or basically done with the forward drum. Install your sealing rings and your input shaft. Put the 48 thousandths snap ring on it. Go ahead and set this into your pump, and we can do an air check. Right here, this port on the pump is your air check. Air check around 35 psi, and this should be a nice tight air check. A nice thump should be heard. Now we're going to move over to the main case and build up our reverse brake. Here we used the blue bonded pistons again from Seal Aftermarket. Go ahead and lube up the bonded piston and lube up the case. Go ahead and put that in the case. Put on your spring cage and your 69 thousandths snap ring. We will want to install the dish plate next. On this one is the opposite direction. The smallest inner groove of the dish plate is touching the piston, and the larger outside is touching the steel. So this these blue marks here indicate the direction of the dish. So put your dish plate in. Then you're going to go with your steels, which are 53 thousandths. So on the bottom, put a 53 thousandths steel, a 59 thousandths clutch, and then alternate those up. There are 4 steels and 4 clutches. Top pressure plate on this was 140 thousandths, and the snap ring was 93 thousandths. Clutch clearance is about 40 to 60 thousandths also on this clutch. Alrighty, so now we're going to move over and we're going to jump into the pulleys on this. Here's just a breakdown of the primary pulley. The primary pulley is the one without the output gear on it. So here's just a breakdown. We have the nut, bearing and retainer, and then we have a retaining ring. But we're going to go over this individually. This is just a main exploded view of the complete pulley setup. So the first thing we want to do is remove your 46 millimeter nut. Go ahead and install like a 3-jaw puller underneath this bearing retainer right here, and pull the bearing retainer and bearing up off the pulley. And under that, you're going to find your lock ring with 2 half moons. Don't have to press this piston down or anything, but you're going to need like a sharp punch or screwdriver, and you'll just want to knock this lock ring right here upward, and then it's going to expose these 2 half moon keepers. Then all you do is you just knock the half moon keepers out, and this piston's going to stay on the shaft itself. The piston's pressed onto the shaft. For safety reasons, I like to go ahead and put the nut back on the top of the pulley there. Just thread it on halfway or so. It's not real important, but it keeps everything together and it keeps it from popping all over the place when you put the puller on there. So here we have the TJ1 posi lock puller. It's locked onto the outside of the pulley here. We go ahead and pull up on the puller, and as soon as the piston pops off, we go ahead and stop. You'll definitely know once the piston comes off, it'll pop off pretty good. Want to make sure your hands and fingers are not in this area where the nut or above the piston is. So now we remove the nut we had on their hand tight. I like to do this inside of a bucket or a box, something along those lines, because we'll lose these little balls. If you don't, they'll go rolling across the bench. It's not a real big issue because a lot of the rebuild kits are coming with dowels or coming with new balls. The Transco flow control valve also comes with some new balls for you if you do happen to lose some and need to find some somewhere. So we're going to remove this fixed piston, this top piston, take it off. Take the sealing ring off, clean the sealing ring, clean the grooves. Some people say they like to reuse that sealing ring and just clean it off real well. The kits come with a couple different seals. Make sure you select the right seal. Put it on the piston and put it in the drum. Make sure the overlap is correct gap, and there's not too big of a gap there because one's smaller than the other. So make sure you select the right sealing ring when you change that ring. Then we have a return spring, and we have the upper sheave. So To get this all off, just basically pull up on the upper sheave. What's going to happen is these balls, there's 3 balls per groove, so there's 3 grooves. There's one here, and then there's 2 more on the other side. So you're going to have a total of 9 balls on this primary pulley. After you pull the upper sheave off, balls fall out and everything like that, you want to make sure you look inside the sheave here and on the grooves and make sure they're in good shape. So here's explaining the 3 balls, or the aftermarket kits have the Seal aftermarket kits have the 1 roller, or they have 1 roller per groove. Not sure if any of the other kits, to the best of my knowledge, don't have the rollers in them yet, but they may be planning on doing that in the future. So inspect the splines or the grooves. The round grooves are for where the rollers and ball rides. Make sure those are nice and smooth. Nothing breaking up or no pitting in those grooves. So you do not want the pulley to catch. So it needs to go up and down on the main shaft nice and smoothly. There's a couple different ways of installing these balls or grooves, or rollers, excuse me. Some people elect to take this snap ring out and then put this upper pulley on the lower pulley and slide them into the grooves. Each groove will get 3 balls or 1 roller, but you slide the balls or rollers into the groove, and then you pull up on this upper sheave until you can install this round snap ring into place. The way I personally do it is I leave the snap ring in place. I take some of the green assembly lube. I glue the rollers into this upper sheave, and then just install the upper sheave on the lower sheave, and you will see if the rollers don't go into place correctly, they'll actually pop out of place, and you'll see that. So I elect to leave the round snap ring in there. It works for me, but other people like to do it the other way. So you have some options there. Alrighty, so now we need to press this thing back together. We got our balls in there, we got our return spring, new sealing ring, and easiest way is to just turn this thing upside down and put this in the press or an arbor press and press this piston back into place. Make sure that you don't pinch the steel. It's nice and square when you're pressing it into place. Press it down, and then you're going to want to install your half moon retainers again. Put those into the groove. Tap those into place, and then put your locking retainer on the outside of that. After you get retainers in, you want to make sure you don't forget your bearing retainer. Put your bearing retainer in. The flat side of this retainer faces up. Install your bearing. Put some lock nut on your 46mm nut, and we want to torque that nut to 180 foot-pounds. The other way of installing this, pressing this piston on, some elect to turn this pulley over and use a piece of pipe and press down on this piston with the piece of pipe, large socket, something along those lines, so you can kind of see the seal when you're pressing it in. Make sure it's going in correctly and not cutting the seal. So you can either do it either way. You can flip it over and press it like this in the picture, or a nut or pipe to push squarely on this, and so you can see the sealing ring. Either way works. Alright, let's move over to our secondary pulley. The secondary pulley is the one that has this output gear on it. This one has left-handed threaded nuts, no ID marks or anything like that. This is just an exploded view of the whole assembly. And now we'll start breaking it down. So go ahead and remove the 50mm nut. Most of the time you need a deep 50mm socket for this. Then you'll want to, over here on the right hand side, you'll see that I put a bearing splitter underneath the park gear. and you pull the part gear and the output gear off at the same time. One note on this output gear, the flat side of it is facing the nut. On the back side there's a little groove. So after we get the part gear and everything off, there's a snap ring right here that rides on the outside of this pulley, or the inside of the pulley, but on the top of the pulley. Remove this snap ring, kind of grab a hold of the shell and kind of tap it with the hammer on the side while pulling up, and this shell will come off. There's no seal or O-ring or anything on this shell. Once you get your shell off, then you have another set of locking rings and half moon retainers. Do the same, knock this retainer upward, and then pull your two half moon retainers out of the place. You'll want to go ahead and reinstall the part gear and hand tighten the nut a little ways just to keep this thing together. I like to do this thing in a box or a bucket just like the other pulley to keep everything together. As here on the far left, you see I have the part gear and the nut installed on it. Attach your posi lock puller or your choice of puller to the pulley. Go ahead and pull up until this pressed on piston pops off. After that, we're going to take your piston off, clean the seal and replace the seal. Make sure the piston's in good shape. You have a spring, and then underneath this spring you have another retainer. And then in this pulley you have 4 balls, or some of the aftermarket kits, still aftermarket. They give you replacement roller, and you have one roller or one set of 4 balls. In each groove there's 3 grooves. So make sure these grooves are nice and clean. Make sure the rounded grooves here are nice and clean and not notched out or anything like that, pitted from the balls that are breaking up or anything like that. Make sure you don't try to put them in the square notches right here. These are oil holes. The balls will fall inside and it will destroy the piston and the pulley, and you'll be buying another set of pulleys. So same way as the other way, you can either remove this round snap ring here and install this sheave on top of here, and then place the balls down into the groove and then put your round snap ring back in. Or as I do, I glue them in here right underneath the snap ring, and then put the sheave on top of the other sheave here. That seems to work best for me, but do whichever is best for you. Make sure you check your pulley on both pulleys. Make sure the surface is nice and smooth and no pitting. A lot of time these little marks like this on this pulley, you can clean them off with sandpaper. Put them in a lathe and just run like a sandpaper or a file on the lathe. Don't need to necessarily take any material off the pulleys, but what happens is the belt material sometimes gets embedded into the pulleys, and all you're doing is knocking that excess material off from where the belt was embedded into it. So a lot of these pulleys you can actually clean up, but if they can catch your fingernail and they're divots or deep scratches, they definitely need to be replaced. Alright, so here we go back together. We already installed our balls or rollers, and our pulley is on top of the other one already. We put our spring retainer and the spring in. We got a new seal on here, and we're pressing this pulley down. This time I showed you that I was using a pipe to go down, and you can press it down and the press this way, or you can do as the other one did. You can flip it over and press it 180 over. So either way you want to do it, it's your choice. Go ahead and try both ways. After you get this piston pressed on, make sure you install your half moon retainers. Install the retaining ring. Go ahead and tap your shell down into place with the snap ring. Install your part gear and your output gear. The flat side is up. You have to put those in a press or arbor press to press those back down into place most of the time. A little bit of Loctite and torque your 50mm nut down to 200 foot-pounds. It's a left-handed threaded nut. And now the belt. This is a good belt. See these grooves here on the edge of the belt where it rides against the pulleys? This is what you want to see. You want to see these nice fine ridges, nice and clean. They have a pattern to them. There's not material stuck in between them or anything like that. Or let's say this top edge is not smooth and the rest of it has lines. That would be a bad belt. If you see any metals piling up on the edges or anything, replace the belt. So you want to see a nice even pattern of fine lines all the way across this face of the belt, and then you can go ahead and reuse it. One thing about the belts, all these pieces here are held together with these steel belts inside here. Some of them have 6, some of them have 12. They vary from one transmission to the other. These belts, if you see them cracked or you see anything sticking out or they look funny, you may want to replace the belt. These belts hold the whole belt assembly together. If these belts come out of the elements, that part, this thing will fall into about 400 different pieces. Always note the direction of the belt. You know, if you wash this thing in solvent and your arrow gets washed off, look at this right here, the sides of these elements. The part that has the bump right here, this curved edge, is the direction of the belt. So the bump goes towards the arrow, and it's going towards the left here. Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and put both these pulleys back on the rear cover. This one had a 30,000 shim over here on the secondary rear case half. The primary had no shim at all. Go ahead and put a new sealing ring in here. And then you'll want to put your puller on your secondary pulley, pulling up on that to make this pulley as wide as possible. Go ahead and start the belt on the secondary pulley first, and then tip the secondary pulley into the primary pulley. I install the primary pulley on the rear cover first to keep it stationary, and just tip this secondary pulley over into the primary pulley, get the belt around it, and then you'll be able to slide the secondary pulley into the rear cover. After you get this all together and the rear cover together, there's 6 bolts that hold the back of these pulleys in. Make sure you install the new O-rings on the bolts, and a little bit of RTV wouldn't be a bad idea too. And go ahead and install the retaining bolts to hold everything together in this rear cover. And then we're going to go ahead and assemble everything, all these sub-assemblies, in the next chapter. Let's talk about the transfer shaft. If we need to take that apart, we got a 32mm nut. When you reinstall it, it's going to be torqued at 150 foot-pounds. We have one tapered bearing. The transfer gear itself, this is the bottom side that has the raised edge. So the raised edge goes to the pinion. The dipped downside, or the side that's lower than the gear, goes to the bearing. Valve body. A lot of care should be taken on this valve body. The main 2 problems on these CVTs are the flow control valve and the pump, the seals inside of the pulleys, and valve body wear. So on the lower valve body here, we want to check for wear. You also want to make sure you take every valve out of this valve body. I don't do that on every transmission, But on CVTs, Jatco CVTs, I pull every valve out of every valve body because they will hang. Using a pick or a screwdriver is not going to tell you anything on this valve body. They like to hang. They also create like a, I call it a black resin, but a fine black resin material. It gets stuck in these valves and will drag these valves, and you'll have pressure codes, chattering issues, those kind of things. So make sure you pull every valve out of every valve, pull every valve out of every section of valve body on this one at a time, and clean the bore. Inspect the valve. Couple areas we can check here. This lockup limit, you can vacuum test right here where the arrow is. That's testing this land right here for wear. There's some oversized valves for that. I haven't seen a huge issue myself on the lockup TCC limit valve, but there is a valve made for it. Lockup regulator valve, you can vacuum test here. It's testing in between the small and the larger valve here. I have seen this valve worn some. Usually you can see wear on the valve itself, along with the primary regulator valve. It likes to wear also, and you can vacuum test it at this land here. Vacuum test numbers, you're going to have to come up with your own numbers on vacuum test. It kind of varies for everybody's tool and everybody's area. I think some of the numbers are a little skewed that are published, but come up with your own numbers. After working on some of these, you'll see what normal is and what you can get away with or what you need to replace them on. So use your own guide on this. These are fairly good size valves. They don't test really well, even brand new. So that's kind of my advice on vacuum testing on this valve body. The main thing is to look at the valve, and you'll see a lot of the wear if the anodized coating is coming off. Here's the middle valve body. We got a couple check balls here. So we have 4 check balls. We have a screen that goes in this location, and a little screen with the spring. The spring faces up here. Couple areas to check here. The secondary pulley control valve loves to stick, loves to wear, so you need to make sure you check this valve and this bore. This lockup control valve, make sure it's nice and free. Make sure this plunger in this aluminum sleeve is not stuck. If worn, you can replace this plunger. And another valve that loves to wear out is our solenoid regulator valve, like every other transmission. So make sure you check this valve and bore in this section of valve body too. Again, don't forget to remove every valve and make sure every valve is free in this unit. So here's our top valve body. We got a little lube valve here on the left hand side, a little plastic valve and spring goes here in the bottom. Ratio control valve and little tiny spring, little tiny spring here, very thin, kind of easy to misplace. Make sure you put that back in. We have another screen in this section. The open part of the screen fits into the plate. And then we have your ohm information here. Most all the solenoids are 3 to 9 ohms, except the lockup solenoid is 6 to 19 ohms. Bunch of different sizes of valve body bolts when we're reassembling this. So I put a letter and the length of the bolts and the locations of the bolts. So go ahead and match up the bolts to the length and the letter, and you'll see that on each section where they go. All bolts are torqued to 90 inch-pounds. One kind of word of caution: go ahead and start on this section of valve body, start all the bolts, then flip it over and do this section of the valve body, torque all those bolts down, and then you're going to have to install your wiring harness, your sensors, and finish off those bolts when you're done with the rest. And these bolts over here are 90 inch-pounds also. In the next chapter, we're going to start assembling everything. This will conclude our Chapter 6, Part 2 on rebuilding of the jf010e transmission. We want to thank you for participating in our virtual training solution powered by ATRA. Until next time, let's keep fixing transmissions together.